that's just a bad starting point. We need to start with not what are the do's and don'ts of sexuality, but what is sex for? What is marriage for? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be an embodied, sexed image bearer of God?
Guys, welcome back to another episode of The Naked Gospel. Our vision is to see a revival of sexual integrity throughout the entire bride of Christ. To that end, we cover topics from marriage to sex trafficking to pornography and everything in between. I'm your host, Shane O'Neill, and today we're joined by Preston Sprinkle. Preston is a New York Times bestselling author. He's a father, he's a husband, and he currently serves for the Center of Faith, Sexuality, and Gender, where they just engage areas of faith, gender, and sexuality theologically and courageously. Honestly, they're just incredible. I personally check them out and read Preston stuff all the time. And like I was telling him earlier, he's been a big brother to me from afar. So excited to engage him today and excited you guys are with us. Preston, how are you?
I'm doing all right, man. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, how's the, we were talking about this earlier, how's the, just the virus stuff been out your way? Idaho is one of the least hit states. I think we've had maybe 10 cases that have been identified. But it's a national, worldwide, catastrophe. So yeah, it's almost like it's interesting to like be living through like a global phenomenon like this. Like this doesn't happen very often, and because of globalization, it's kind of like a new thing.
We live in a web, right? I mean, everything's connected.
Yeah, for sure. So like I was mentioning, I love your work. I love what you do. It's prolific. You're always writing something. You're always speaking somewhere. I know context is important for you, so you're not speaking into a vacuum. And so just a general sweep of how you see kind of the sexual landscape throughout Western culture, so that we have a framing for any content that we put in that direction.
That's a great question. Some people trace it back to the invention of the pill when there was a significant shift. Once you separate sex from procreation, then you allow for all kinds of sexual experiences. In the past, the the possibility, or some might say the threat of having a kid out of this moment what was kind of it added some brakes maybe on sexual expression, but ever since the invention of the pill back in the 50s and 60s, I mean, that was kind of a big turning point. But beyond that, I mean, we live in a secular culture, and of course, a culture, a society, a nation that isn't submitting to the lordship of Christ, or who doesn't have a higher authority to appeal to, of course, they're going to pursue their own desires or construct a sexual ethic that might not resonate with Christianity. So this is where, some Christians who still want to think that America is like a Christian nation, they get all kind of freaked out that, where have we gone as a nation? It's like, well, I don't know if we ever were that Christian to begin with. So I mean, it's no matter where we are now, it's way, way more conservative than first century Rome, the context that early Christianity was born out of. That's I like to remind people. We've been here before, so whatever seems like crazy or whatever, it's not that abnormal for a Christian living in a secular society.
No, that's helpful. I heard it was John Mark Comer, a pastor out on the West Coast, and he said it's not that we're living in a post-Christian nation. We're just interacting with the idea of a pre-Christian nation. Like a lot of this stuff isn't necessarily new. It's just that Christianity renovated the West in such a way that we're seeing things fall apart, and we're kind of like scrambling and panicking because of that. And I found good resonance with those observations. That's a
great point. Yeah, as always, John Mark usually hits the nail on the head.
Yeah, he's a winsome dude. Yeah, there's I kind of see like the polarity of it with like conservatives. They don't necessarily, conservative Christians don't always see the worst of hookup culture, and so sometimes it's easier to ignore despite the fact that, I mean, stats say like 96% of Christian men have viewed porn. So like that's its own thing. But nonetheless, they can kind of ignore what's going on. But then you read in like the Atlantic or the Washington or whatever, where they're doing articles on hookup culture, like the latest dating apps and those kinds of things. So it really is a mess of a landscape when you try and make sense of it all.
It is fascinating how, Christians, and I hate the stereotype, but let's just say the more conservative brand of Christianity can sometimes not pay attention to kind of the cultural movement that's been going on. I recently wrote an article about polyamory and Christianity today. It has to do with plural relationships, 3 or 4 or 5 or more people in relationship with each other. And some people were just like so startled by it, why are we even talking about this? This is crazy. But this has been a conversation in society for 10, 20 years, and this isn't, 5% of the population is currently in a plural relationship, and 20%, according to one survey, has been in some kind of plural, they call it, consensual non-monogamy, where it's like, hey, yeah, you can go, fool around with this person. It's, I'm fine with it. Yeah. This has been kind of the normal in culture, which again, doesn't mean Christians should normalize it. We should always be, we should always be not attracted to a sexual ethic that deviates from God's plan. But at the same time, we shouldn't be so shocked when we hear about it. We shouldn't have our head in the sand either. So. Yeah.
I had heard you say a while ago. It was kind of with your interaction with Justin Lee. I think that was probably last year, but you were talking about the kind of the cliche of hate the sin, love the sinner, and then your kind of twist on that of like hate this, love the sinner, hate our own sin. Because this has invaded our own homes, whether we are willing to actually acknowledge that and just speak about it or even like seek help about it. I mean, we as a ministry, Proven Ministries, we go in and partner with churches because we don't want to like be just like a para-church organization where people are like, oh yeah, like go to the church for the word of God, but then come over here to Proven Ministries for help with sexual integrity. It's like, no, we want to go in and train and equip within the church. I want to be a resource that way. And I couldn't tell you like how many times we get pushed away because the pastors say it's not an issue, or like they get sheepish about the stuff, and on a few occasions, like a year or two later, like their own stuff comes out in a public way, and they wouldn't have us come in because of their own ish, Wow. So it's like it's in our homes, it's in our churches, and it's devastating.
Yeah, better to deal with it head on and admit it with humility than like these things don't exist inside the church.
For sure. Yeah. So that's a really helpful picture of kind of the secular landscape. When it comes to, I know you do a ton of training on this stuff. So when it comes to like just the biblical witness and what the biblical witness says about sexual ethics, sexuality, male and female, are you able to paint a picture for us, whether you start in Genesis and end in Revelation? It can be a sweep or whatever, but some kind of orientation there.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it's hard to answer briefly without giving kind of a superficial overview. But totally. I think Genesis 1 and 2 is incredibly significant for understanding the basics of human nature, the basics of sexuality, sexual expression, marriage. It doesn't give us all the details. It's not going to answer all our questions, but it does give us a foundation. And this is, the work that I primarily deal with is in questions related to LGBTQ questions, same-sex sexuality, transgender identities. And oftentimes in that conversation, people race to, Leviticus or Romans, which, are, Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, Romans 1 is one of the few passages that directly prohibits same-sex relationships. And some people just go straight there. And I'm like, no, we got to go back to the very beginning to look at the fundamental makeup of humanity as a sexual being. So Genesis 1 and 2, you've got a beautiful array of equality and differences playing off each other. You see it in the creation account in Genesis 1. Yeah. Day and night and land and sea and evening and morning, and these kind of differences, these binaries, if you will, dancing together as they sing God's praise in creation, and woven into that is the creation of humanity as male and female, so that male and female are both different, and yet they're equal, and we don't need to diminish the difference in order to establish equality, which is kind of a trend you see, especially today in certain movements. They want to downplay the sex differences in order to accomplish equality. The Bible just doesn't go that direction. It elevates both, celebrates our differences, and celebrates our equality. So, and then of course at the end of Genesis 1, you have the famous marriage passage: a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And that one flesh union has to do with these differences that have been, being laid out in Genesis 1 and 2. At the climax of Genesis 2, they come together in this one flesh union. And one significant reason for that, and I don't want to get all Catholic on you, but one significant reason for that is procreation. That was one of the first commands given to humanity, is be fruitful and multiply, and that command is woven into the very makeup of this sexual union. And again, there's the way the Bible treats sex and procreation, there's some diversity there, but I just think the way the Bible starts out is very different than how maybe a secular sexual ethic will start out. Of, hey, if you love this person, feels good, you're not hurting anybody, kind of like, as long as it's consensual, it's not harmful, then go for it, especially if it's going to bring you desires. And it's like the Bible just doesn't, that's not the foundation for sexual ethics in terms of a biblical view, but that's kind of the twin pillars of a secular ethic, is consensuality and, don't hurt anybody else.
Yeah. So when it comes to, that's helpful. Thank you. When it comes to so there's that narrative sweep. A lot of people will take that image and then pull out do's and don'ts. And I was just curious how you communicate that proactively instead of, I guess, reactively.
That's a great question. And, I think one of the dangers of, for instance, the purity culture, the purity movement that was popular back in the 90s and early 2000s, is that it didn't really present a sexual ethic as very different than a secular sexual ethic. It basically took a secular sexual ethic and it's added a footnote, like wait until marriage. But the whole idea of romance, and you're not going to flourish until you have sex, and if you do the right thing, God will bless you with tons of great sex, because if you're not having great sex, you're not going to flourish. And if you don't get married by the time you're 25, you're going to be lonely and depressed, and all this stuff that is not in the Bible, but is absorbed from culture. But then the great contribution that we have made as Christians is, but wait until you get married. That's it. Beyond that, our sexual ethic traditionally has looked very secular. So yeah, I think that's where if we simply begin with a bunch of do's and don'ts, that's just a bad starting point. We need to start with not what are the do's and don'ts of sexuality, but what is sex for? What is marriage for? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be an embodied, sexed image bearer of God? Like some of these real fundamental questions about humanity. I mean, our anthropology, if you will, should precede our sexuality. We need to look at what it means to be human, and the purpose of marriage and sex before we get into what, exploring the guardrails that God has put on us.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. It's, well, just as far as method goes, that's a clean one. I believe his name is David Dennett. He is he's a gay Christian. He practiced celibacy. He studied under N.T. Wright and
David Bennett, yeah.
Bennett, thank you, yeah. And his methodology is pretty anchored in the eschaton, in the consummation of the ages, when it comes to even marriage, where it's a lot of people do see marriage as the point, and so that itself is the end. And he's like, well, no, like marriage itself is a reflection. It's a really good reflection, but it's a reflection nonetheless. And it's only a reflection. There are a lot of other ways that eternity is reflected back to us to kind of give us that telos, to use a nerdy word. And I've appreciated that as well, as far as telling the story and giving just a positive way, even when it comes to longing and intimacy, to say again the anthropology of no, we're designed to be known, to be cherished, to be loved, to be intimate, that is to be human, I appreciate those markers as well, kind of getting in front of the reaction, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. And yeah, he's a brilliant dude. And yeah, a lot of Christian ethicists, they look at kind of creation and resurrection as the twin pillars of a Christian ethic. And we see this in the life of Jesus when he's asked about divorce in Matthew 19, he goes back to Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Paul often, when he's, urging churches to act ethically, he uses the resurrection as kind of that focal point of, since we're going to be like this, then let's start living like this now. So that creation, resurrection, push and pull is the foundation for Christian ethics. But even now, I mean, some people listening might say, I've been at church for 30 years, never even heard that. But if you, and I guess that's part of the problem too. If all we do is focus on do's and don'ts, not an underlying, if I can say, substructure of a biblical sexual ethic, then just telling people do this, don't do that. We've seen it's been ineffective. I mean, you guys deal with a lot of porn and porn addictions. If telling people stop it, it's wrong. Does that work? I mean,
yeah.
And I'm not saying there's an easy answer to what does work, but I think at least part of the problem is we've taken on just a really thin view of what sex is for and why God has created it.
Yeah, Nancy Piercy is good with In Love Thy Body. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it or not.
It's a great book. Yeah.
It's awesome. But she, we tend to look at things almost in the West kind of forensically, just reminiscence of the Enlightenment and modernism and whatnot. And we really do just embody stories, and stories do capture us. And so even like the story behind secularism of like if you have sex with feelings, then you might get hurt, right? So then you're disempowered because of that. Getting hurt means that you're a victim. And so having sex and not caring thus allows you to be empowered. So the one who cares the least is the one who's the most empowered. And that's the story, in secularism. And it is an enticing one because no one wants to get hurt and everyone wants to be known, and they've just been hurt, So it's a twist on irony because just because you think that something won't hurt you if you practice it this way doesn't mean it won't hurt you. Like there are a lot of people that are seriously devastated by the way they practice their sexual ethic within hookup culture and porn culture, and it's wrecking them, and a lot of times they don't even know it.
Yeah. Are you seeing hookup a bigger problem maybe inside the church than people might realize? Or
are you asking that question?
Yeah.
Yeah, subtly. I mean, even what we were talking about earlier, pornography is definitely a bigger problem inside the church than we realize. I think that a majority of millennial churchgoers and the younger generation seem to have a pretty it's almost like this assumption that the Christian ethic has failed. So it's like they go to church for a lot of good reasons, but a sexual ethic typically isn't one of them. And so like even in our groups where we go and we lead these in churches, like a lot of guys use dating apps, and like there's something intuitive inside of them that says like, this is devastating me, that's why I'm at this group. But a lot of times they don't actually know it's wrong. They just know it's instinctively wrong because it's hurting them, and they don't really know what to do with that. So we definitely see it inside of the church, and it's something we wrestle with. So yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah,
I mean, I knew the porn problem was pretty much almost the same in terms of inside, outside the church, but hookup, I know certain churches I talk to, it's a bigger problem where youth, especially youth groups and stuff, it's kind of like it's so normalized, and if it's not even really addressed in the home or at the church,
totally,
they're kind of shocked when like, oh wait, no, if I go to a party, I shouldn't be giving oral sex to this guy that I just met. He's super cute. I'm not,
totally.
He gave me attention. He gave me a ride home or whatever.
Right. Yeah, that stuff is gnarly. Honestly, I mean, we see it in like even like middle school, where that's the standard for intimacy before a guy kisses the girl, right? Wow. Like if she can do that well, then she's girlfriend material, And so like that's happening, that's in like grade schools and whatnot, and honestly, like the issue is massive, and most of the time we're scratching our heads or our hearts are just bleeding, and we're just praying, we're just on our knees. But like, it's definitely bleeding into the church. but it's definitely not talked about. I think your article for Christianity Today was so important and probably got the kind of pushback that it did for the exact same reason, because it's not talked about. I guess you probably got pushback on both sides, didn't you? Because like in the secular, it's like, no, like this is what we do. And then like the more conservative, it's like, no, why are you talking about that? We don't talk about that. That's not an issue. Yeah. You know, I imagine that's just a speculation.
Funny, I got my initial pushback was from people who were polyamorous. Yeah. They said, well, in the article you said it's sin, but you didn't like justify your position. And then for the conservatives, it was kind of like, well, you're too soft on it. You didn't say it was sin hard enough.
Yeah.
So it's like, depending on where people are coming from. And the whole, I guess, I went back and read it. I was like, I could see, I would probably word things different. I would word things differently if I were to write it again. And I even wrote a response kind of showing where I'd word things. But the whole goal was to not give a biblical theology of why it's wrong, or even that it's wrong, even though we did say it's wrong. We believe it's sin. But to simply, in a really non-heated way, just to say, hey guys, pastors, leaders, this is a real thing.
Yeah.
If it's not in your churches yet, it's going to be like tomorrow. So let's just calmly, it is what it is. Let's just begin now preemptively and construct a biblical sexual ethic. The goal of the article wasn't to do that for pastors, but just to encourage them that this needs to be done.
Yeah.
And honestly, I read several of I didn't even know it was getting critiqued till a buddy of mine, because I try to stay off social media these days. It's funny, if you stay off social media, it's like you don't even know what's going on. But
yeah.
Somebody sent me an article, so I read a few of the critiques, and it's kind of I don't know. I'm not going to name any names. It's kind of the same crowd that no matter what I say or do, they're going to say something negative. It's like whatever, So
have they been responding better to your response? Was your response at all helpful, or was that?
They never respond back.
Okay.
I mean, it's
they never apologize.
Well, no, because in this, and I'll say this so generally that I don't want to name any names, but I've been in that kind of brand of Christianity, and to apologize is like a sign of weakness. And I've been there. I'm like, I'm not gonna, or to backtrack anything. So I didn't get any response to the response. Nothing. I mean, I got a lot of people that reached out and said, your article was fine. You didn't need to do that, but thank you for taking the time to respond. I mean, I got people from really conservative branches of Christianity, including Liberty professors and SB Southern Baptist Seminary professors and Master Seminary professors and others that really enjoyed both articles. So again, I think it is a kind of a loud, influential minority of people that was really upset at the article. But
no, that makes sense, man.
I could sneeze and I'd get critiqued for some reason.
For sure. Poor form. Yeah. Okay. Well, this actually sets us up rather well to traverse over a little bit more to the application of what we're talking about. I like apologetics. I think I like apologetics in a specific light. If you understand apologetics as kind of necessarily missiological in the sense that it strives to understand the ideas, the thoughts, and the narratives of a culture so that you can speak that language better, so you can present Jesus better. If it's understood that way, it's missiological because you're contextualizing, right? You're not using your language to communicate truth, assuming or hoping that they'll just get it, and then you walk off saying, peace, I was faithful to the gospel, and I'll go back to my homeland, And so when we look at the church, well, I guess first off, like in your evaluation, you're meeting with churches all the time. Like how are churches doing? The churches, I guess first off, like do you get a lot of invitations? And two, when you get invitations, are they receptive?
Yes and yes. So,
Okay.
I probably turn down 90% of invitations that come my way, and I'm still on the road almost every week. Every other week or so. Well, not now. Everything's been canceled. But
yeah.
I think in the broad landscape of evangelicalism, let's say broadly evangelical, you've got on the one side really, really conservative, like if you even mention homosexuality, like why do we even talk about this? Or they're still advocating for just really kind of older approaches to how we even talk about that conversation. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got people who are very progressive and they're trying to maintain kind of some kind of semblance of evangelicalism, but and some of their beliefs, it just doesn't seem like it's, you know, that they're resonating with traditional evangelical thought. And I think those voices can be really loud, but I think they're pretty small, quite honestly. I think there's a hungry, more quiet, eager majority, you know, that's, you know, right of center, maybe left of center. I don't love these terms being just for the sake of discussion. And I think they want to love people well. They're tired of the church being known as being just anti-gay. You know, they want the church to be loving and accepting of people and understanding and caring and pastoral, and to look at our own hypocrisies and to admit our own sin. And yet they also want to stick true to scripture, and they just don't see scripture justifying same-sex relationships, let alone other sexual practices. So they're really eager for a grace truth balance, which is kind of my shtick. So I'm hopeful, honestly. Truly am. I'm really hopeful for the future of evangelicalism. I think there's always going to be that extreme right and left, you know, that's going to do their thing. But I think there's just a lot of really neat leaders across the country doing it well, I think.
That's awesome, man. That's super encouraging to hear. Because being receptive is one thing, but like actually caring is another. So it's encouraging to hear that they're taking it even a step further than that. When it comes to, so Jesus died and resurrected to give us things, right? Primarily to give us himself. But that comes with things like the church or like covenant and those kinds of things. And those are resources for us to know him and give him to a world that hurts real deep, right? All of creation is groaning. I'll play this out a little bit more. Confession and accountability. So accountability has been kind of a resource that Christians have used by way of discipleship and helping people. Somewhere along the way, accountability came, like an accountability partner became more of like the person you call when you've messed up, as opposed to the person who stands with you when you hurt and when you ache. So I found covenant to be a much more helpful sort of thing, because like we stand together against something, as opposed to just like helping me stand after I'm already beat up and broken, to like move through that darkness together. So I love heaven's resource of covenant, and it plays out in our groups all the time. And I'm really thankful for it. And it's cool to excavate that resource that Jesus died and resurrected to give us. What are, when it comes to like covenant or the church, like some other resource that you found helpful to give to people so that they can just have?
I love the way you frame it, because for me, when I hear accountability, and maybe this is my Gen X, you know, accountability is just the guy that shames you when you screw up. Yeah. Or I got to make this call now, you know, totally. I watched porn last night or whatever.
Totally.
And, I love the idea of them coming alongside you. And I guess, you know, to their credit, that's probably what it was originally designed to be. So no, I don't know if I could improve on what you said about the idea of viewing it as a covenant, as a, you know, or even through the lens of covenant and also, you know, family. In Mark 10, 29 and 30 talks about people, you know, leaving everything to follow Jesus. So you have the idea of sacrifice, but then you get the reward of this covenant family, mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. And that is the one of the great rewards. We often think, oh, you know, give up all this great stuff, life's miserable, but we get eternal life in the end, you know? And if that was it, then hey, that'd be worth it. But Jesus says we also get in this present life, mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and fields, which is the first century kind of an economic, you know, gift. Somebody else's field is now your field. And when you're down, they're going to help you out. So, and I don't know, this has been one of the toughest things, I think, of being a Christian in the 21st century was the way we do church, our ecclesiology, our structures, our DNA, you know, we're just so individualistic and so kind of church service oriented that you know, most Christians I talk to, you know, when they look at the New Testament and just that real robust covenant family that they have been rewarded with, they say, where is that? I don't have that kind of, you know, reward in my life. And yet sanctification is impossible on your own. And when I say on your own, I don't mean like, well, I have a church service I go to and a Bible study I attend. I'm talking like, you know, on your way to church, when you and your wife are fighting like cats and dogs, do you find healing and covenant coming around you when you show up at church? And they're like, well, no, I'm going to church. I'm not going to get help. And it's like, that dichotomy is just interesting, like so anyway, I'm kind of rambling, but
it's helpful.
The way you frame it, I think is spot on. I think that's something that's desperately needed and yet isn't always lived out on the ground.
That's helpful, Preston. Thank you. When people articulate the way they do church versus the way that you see it in the first century or the way you paint it there in Mark 10, how do you then try and give that to them? How do you try and give them that practice? I
don't know. I don't think I can. I mean, this just deals with some deeper structural issues within 21st century Christianity. I mean, one could argue, like Francis Chan has and others, we need almost a complete overhaul of how we even think about church. I see my job, if you compare like the church to a house, I don't know, maybe I'm an electrician. I come in and help people with the wiring and that. I can prevent your house maybe burning down, But I think there's something in the concrete, some cracks in the concrete that at the end of the day, we can fix the electricity all we want, but if the concrete's shifting or there's cracks or the very structure is in need of attention, then but I'm an electrician. I can't I would have to focus on
right. You're not an architect, right?
Yeah. And maybe I might try to do that at some point. But
no, I appreciate you letting me ask. It's important. It is important. The idea of like going to a location, a guy talking at you that you don't really know for like an hour, singing with a bunch of people you don't know, and then doing that once a week and expecting that to renovate your soul. So I know that like family is dear to you. I know that like covenant is dear to you. I know stuff like Wesley Hill's work is just absolutely incredible. I mean, so good, what he's giving, not just to singled. I think he's kind of reimagining covenant and marriage for married folk as well. I think his work is just amazing. So those kinds of people give me hope. They're coming along and they're being the plumbers and the other sorts of laborers that we might not necessarily be. So that's helpful, Preston. Thank you. Preston, I want to honor your time. I just really like mixing it up with you. And it's cool because this is an example of Mark 10. I don't have a brother, I was born that way, but like being able to have a big brother from afar and having a lot of big brothers, like some of the people that I've named, I love their spirit. I love your spirit. And, your mind and your heart seem proportional with one another. So just really thankful for the gift that you are to the body. Thanks for being on with us today. I really, really enjoy it, man.
I appreciate it, man. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
For sure. So Preston, you've got another book coming out soon, Transgender Identities, the Church and What the Bible Has to Say. It comes out in October of this year. Yeah.
It's called Embodied, Transgender Identities, the Church and What the Bible Has to Say. And it's basically just kind of an overview of the whole trans conversation. It deals with just understanding what does it mean to be trans, gender and sex, and kind of the fundamental things. Then I go through the Bible. What does the Bible say about being male and female? Could somebody be born in the wrong body? Is there such thing as a male brain in a female body, or vice versa? Could somebody have a feminine soul in a male body? And there's a lot of questions that people are asking. So it kind of deals with a lot of that, then gets into practical things like, using somebody's pronouns or name, or even the ethics of transitioning, changing your body into a different sex, or attempting to, in bathrooms and, the stuff that you see that comes up in the conversation. So probably the most difficult book I've ever written. Just deals with a lot of different strands of thinking and questions and disciplines. And so I'll be happy to see it out.
That's awesome, man. We're looking forward to it. Again, guys, that's October of this year.
October this year, yeah.
Very sweet, very sweet. So look for that. And guys, thanks for being with us today. I will have the Christianity Today article that Preston wrote along with his response in the show notes, and along with the Center of Faith that he works for. Check that out. Really love his work. Support it wholeheartedly. Thanks for being with us. Preston, thanks for being with us, man. Really, really cool to be with you.
My pleasure. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Take care, brother.